The Armed Forces Day Crossband test is an excellent opportunity for amateur stations to contact U.S. government military stations. The test for 2022 is scheduled for Saturday, the 14th of May. Amateur stations will be able to make two-way contact with military stations and to copy a message from the Secretary of Defense sent by CW, RTTE, and the military standard digital waveforms. We're going to prepare our station for participation in this episode of Radio KD8TTE. Stick around.
Black one, black one.
In this video, we're going to prepare for participation. We're going to get the official information from DOD. We're going to plan the operation, that is the hours that we'll work and the objectives that we'll perform, and if there's any particular stations that we want to work. We'll prepare our stations with our transceivers, our computers, and to get things going, I was listening to WWV for the DOD COMEX 22-2 last week.
At the tone, 21 hours, 10 minutes. Coordinated Universal Time.
The Department of Defense Armed Forces Day Crossband test will take place on 14 May from 1100 hours through 2359 hours Zulu. Please go to www.dodcomars.org for a complete listing of stations and to take a listener survey.
Based on the instruction I picked up from WWV, I went to www.dodcomars.org. I found a drop-down navigation element and chose Armed Forces Day. That took me to a page with a document describing the test in more detail. It's only 3 pages, an easy read of a few paragraphs followed mostly by a station list and a few closing bits of information. Some highlights from the document. DOD is hosting the Armed Forces Day Crossband test. It's going to be the 14th of May, that's Saturday. It's open to all licensed amateur radio operators. This test has been going on annually for more than 50 years. It's an interoperability exercise that is specifically authorized in the rules for amateur radio under 47 CFR 97.111. This is going to test and to challenge your skills in being able to operate in a controlled scenario. Military stations are going to be transmitting on advertised frequencies and announce where they are listening inside of the amateur spectrum. And then there's a list of stations and frequencies that follows. Going down the list, we find stations organized not quite alphabetically, showing call sign, station ID, and in most cases location, and hours of operation and frequencies. A few things stand out. Some indicate modes in parentheses, such as CW and RTTE, as well as upper sideband. Some indicate hours of operation outside of what we heard on the WWV broadcast. I also noticed some 60-meter channels where amateur may transmit, but most of these frequencies are outside of the amateur spectrum, so our amateur stations may not transmit there. So how does this work if we're not able to transmit on most of the frequencies listed on the guide? Well, this is where the crossband part of the crossband test comes into play. These frequencies are where the amateur stations are to listen. The amateurs may listen anywhere. There's nothing that restricts you from listening inside of HF spectrum. It's the emission of signals that is restricted. So you can listen on the advertised frequencies and then find out what they're saying. You'll find that they're going to tell you where they are listening, which is different from where they're transmitting. I checked my logs from last year for examples. On the 8th of May 2021, I was listening on 5371.5 kHz upper sideband at 0:50 Eastern Time. That was 11:50 Zulu. Now that's 60 meters, channel 4. As an amateur station, I have transmit privileges there, but only on a secondary basis. A U.S. government station on that frequency has precedence over my amateur station, so I need to listen for instructions. If I transmit without instruction from the primary user, then I, as a secondary user, am interfering with the primary user. That's obviously a no-go. What that station operator said is that they are listening for responses on 7205.5 kilohertz. I did not transmit at the same place as the calling station, but switched over to listen at the same place the station announced they're listening. Last year's instructions told me that station was at Fort Bragg. I know where that is. It's in North Carolina, about 400 miles from me. I heard stations in Texas more than 1,000 miles from me, which made me think that the band was probably too long for me to catch that station right then. I was right, and I kept going. I'll skip ahead a few hours to show what I heard on another frequency. Station NAF was transmitting on a frequency that's very close to part of the amateur spectrum and was listening in the amateur spectrum very close to his transmission. He didn't just call for any station to call him on the other frequency. He gave a little bit of history about the station, the classic equipment that they were using, and a funny weather report. He added that it was only the second time since the station ceased normal operation that it had been activated, and then said he was listening on the other frequency for responses. I flipped over there to listen, and there was a huge pileup. My 100 watts in a wire would take a while to break through all of that. With some patience, though, it can work. A few minutes later, I moved over to one of the military frequencies advertising CW operations. Over at 5735 kilohertz, I caught station NSS transmitting CW. They said they were listening at 7029 kilohertz inside the amateur spectrum. Several hours earlier, that working between 5 megahertz and 7 megahertz didn't work so well with Fort Bragg on voice, so I was a little bit skeptical. Nevertheless, I configured my rig, we'll come back to that in a minute, and I transmitted my call sign with CW, hand-keyed on my excellent Bengali Expedition key. I'll wax philosophical about that key another time. Much to my delight, I heard a response back giving me a signal report of 599 into the Naval Academy at Annapolis. We had a little bit of an exchange back and forth, and the operator asked if I could work 30 meters. When I said that I could, they sent me another frequency to try. I got QSL instructions, and then off I went to listen on the designated frequency. I got the station again on 30 meters, again with 599. I think this was probably my favorite contact last year. Being able to reach the same station on two different crossband circuits using CW to get there really made my day. So let's talk about how to get this crossband thing to work. You listen on one frequency, you transmit on another. We do this all the time on 2 meters and 70 centimeters where we're using repeaters. And sometimes we do it in contests on HF, but we're usually moving just up or down a little bit from where we're transmitting. Working this way is called a split, and this used to be really easy. Once upon a time, radio receivers and transmitters were separate units. And working a split was easy. You would just turn the receiver to one frequency and the transmitter to another, and off you go. These newfangled all-in-one units, transmitter and receiver, transceivers, need to do something special. Most of these have dual VFO, so the dual VFO radios mean that we can set one variable frequency oscillator, VFO, to one setting, and a second VFO to another. Normally, transceiver VFOs work completely independently, but you can make them work together using a split. Using your rig's manual to see how to set it up is going to show you that it's probably a lot easier than you might think. A basic HF rig like the Yaesu FT450D shows a simple procedure. You switch to VFO B and set it for how you want to transmit. Set the mode, the frequency, and so on. Switch over to VFO A and set it for how you want to receive. The mode, the frequency, and so on. Hit the split button, you'll see a split indicator illuminate, and now it's ready to go. That's the kind of rig I use, and now my rig would be listening on VFO A, and then when I hit push to talk or key, it's going to use VFO B. Finally, below the list of stations, there's more links for information if you want to be able to get that message from the Secretary of Defense using one of the military standard digital emission types. You can do that. There's a software package that is available from that link that is going to give you the ability to get your Windows machine up and running so it's able to make sense of those waveforms. Read the documentation about that. Some of those are also able to work on Linux under emulators like Wine. And of course, there's also Ridian CW. We're not going to deal with any of that today. We really want to focus on just getting started with this crossband exercise. So a few takeaways. The Armed Forces Day Crossband test is in 22 for the 14th of May. It's another way to work with stations across services, and in this case is going to be different from what we were doing last week in the DOD COMEX 22-2. You listen on one frequency, you transmit on another. You can get QSL's acknowledgments from the military stations, and you can answer a survey from DOD after you've participated. A little bit of preparation is going to go a long way. Be patient, take good notes. You can learn a lot from this operation. Have fun. Let us know how you do. This is Radio KD8TTE, out.